It is almost 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, depending on where you are today.
Yes, so we're
John,
so glad everyone's here to join us.
yeah.
It's 4 o'clock where it matters. Just saying.
4 o'clock in the future.
All the cool kids are on Eastern time, right, John?
There you go. And we are aware that there's a little black box across the top of that screen. If Michelle, Sheila, Lauren, if you're wondering, we see that as well.
Yes, we definitely spent some time troubleshooting that, and we're just going to have to rely on Google after this meeting to help us figure out what's going on. But what you all are seeing is a shadow of my control panel here, so I don't know how to make that go away for you. And it is 3 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. We'll keep admitting people as they pop into the waiting room, but we're going to honor your time and get started here on time. Thank you, whether it is 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock your time. I know it is important to you. Your free time is important, and we're glad that you took some time to spend it doing professional development today that will benefit your students. Today is the final segment of our series on high leverage practices that focus on instruction. We're going to look today at intensive instruction, meaningful feedback, and assistive and instructional technology, which are HLPs 19, 20, and 22, if you're following along in your HLP trifold. All right, so where we've kind of been is what this slide highlights. Throughout this series, we have been looking for, we've done 4 different sessions. We've looked at the high leverage practices as outlined by the Cedar Center and by the Indiana CEC as well. And then as we looked through those, we were looking at just a deep dive really into how to improve our instructional practice. So the other HLPs got into behavior and teacher practices, but this one we're really looking at just the instructional practices that benefit our students. So our objectives for today, session 4, is going to be to look at strategies that effectively use assistive technology to support student learning, which is HLP number 19. We'll look at understanding programs and procedures for intensive instruction, which is HLP 20. And finally, identify best practices for providing meaningful feedback for our students to positively impact student learning. And that's HLP 22 in those trifolds. So what I want you to kind of think about, we're just going to do some sharing in the chat if you're willing to participate with us. I just want you to think about the following. One thing, you can share one of these two. One way to get students timely feedback in your classroom setting, or an instructional technology app or device used by students in your classroom that's working really well. So if you think in those two kind of buckets of instructional practices and share one of those in the chat, we would appreciate it just to get our conversation started today, get our minds thinking about these ideas. And then I'm going to ask Alana and John to help me as things kind of pop up in the chat, because if I pull it up, it's going to create another black box on your screen, I think.
Yeah, Lana clickers and
Lauren. With the
Smartboard.
Yes.
Yeah, smartboard countdown timer for Lauren.
Yeah, those visual timers are so great for our students. That smartboard timer, it's excellent for everybody in the classroom to see how much time is left. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and Michelle said dry erase boards provide immediate feedback.
Absolutely. Really helps us stay on top of where our students are in the process and their learning as well. All right, so as you've gotten your brain thinking about those, we are going to dive into HLP 19, which is really about those instructional technology apps or devices which are used by students in our classroom. With assistive and instructional technologies, what we know is that these digital tools, they really do increase opportunities for students to respond. So I always compare it to the any app that you have from a fast food chain like Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's. There's always some kind of little sticker, or it's not even things that are valuable as far as money goes or free stuff, but you can always earn stickers or badges or different backgrounds and things that are going to show that you are a repeat customer. By going there more often, you get those. That's what these digital tools do for our students. They increase their opportunities to respond and to engage, but in our case, it's with the content, not with a coffee or a cheeseburger. By doing this, what our app friends know is that this improves student engagement. It helps them to engage with the content on our end, helps you to buy more coffee on their end. But what we want is for our students to keep coming back and keep engaging with that content. We can do that not just through apps that other people create, but also through collaborative documents, visual timelines, visual timers that you mentioned in the chat, things like graphing calculators, AV tools, and screen readers. All of these are examples of these technologies that we utilize in our classroom. And one of the important things to do is to really consider the difference between those words that we use. Many times the vocabulary is used interchangeably. Assistive technology and instructional technology, while there's overlap between them, they actually serve two different purposes. Assistive technology, those are the items and things that our students use. These are our students with a disability, and it improves their function or their capabilities in some way. So these particular assistive technology items are likely the things that you consider when you're thinking about perhaps student communication. So those Dynavoxes or uh, LAMP, the Words for Life program, those kinds of communication pieces that help our students who are nonverbal or have those verbal weaknesses might be able to communicate using that assistive technology. Those are good examples of those. Instructional technology are tools used in learning that benefit a lot of students. So these not a lot of students benefit all students, are provided to all students. Instructional technology are things like your Google Classroom, where everyone uses it, or clickers like Alana mentioned, different programs like that, Blookit, or things that your textbook company provides that has all of these activities in it, all of those. That's instructional technology. Assistive technology is, again, those that are specifically devised to help students with disabilities. The best practice for using these two when we consider assistive technology or instructional technology is really to use a combination of both to meet the student needs. That doesn't mean that we say that we exclude students from certain things. So if this student uses assistive technology, let's say in the form of the Dynavox or LAMP Words for Life, they still have access to and can utilize Google Classroom, clickers, all of those kinds of things. So using that assistive technology piece is not a precursor. They don't have to then not use the other instructional technology available. So we want to be able to use a combination of both to meet all student needs for technology. The tricky part is making the decision of how to choose the right technology for our students. And one of the tools that's available for this is what's called the SET framework. The SET framework allows us to really make a good decision about what types of technology, whether assistive or instructional, we're putting in front of our students. And it encourages us to think about it in 4 different categories. We consider our student, the environment, the task, and the tools. So for example, there's a local school district near my home that does not use Google Classroom for all of the grade levels. They find that the younger students in K1 really need the additional support that's provided by a different program. So they use they use Seesaw instead because it is more user-friendly for their K-1 students. So those are some options. So they considered those 4 things: their students, their environment, their task, and their tools, to make a quality decision on which program to purchase for which grade level. You can consider this in the smaller subject as well. You can go through and really determine what particularly meets individual students' needs. That means when we consider the student individually, we consider their own personal strengths, needs, weaknesses. Some students find that something like an iPad is very helpful to them. Other students find it to be distracting in the learning environment. So we have to consider what that student is able to do with the technology, and that's why student comes first on that list. First, we know our student. We'll choose technology based on the student's needs and strengths, and then also their interests and preferences as well. We also have to make sure that we understand the environment in which the student will be using this particular piece of technology. So a great example of this is during the COVID pandemic. During the COVID pandemic, the technology and supports that were available in the classrooms had to be sent home. And in some cases that worked well. In other cases, it was technology and assistive equipment that actually was not useful in the home environment, or didn't serve the same purpose, didn't work in the same way. Perhaps on the student's home Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough to meet the needs of the students, those kinds of things. So knowing the environment, knowing what support is available. If you have a particular program that's user-friendly for you in the classroom, it might not be as user-friendly for your student at home without your support there, or without the support of your instructional assistant. Other considerations to include when you're choosing assistive and instructional technology would be the task itself. Google Docs is very helpful for certain tasks like writing, but there are other times when your students may find it that using Google Slides might be more, just like we as adults choose based on the task whether we're going to use Word or PowerPoint. That's how we have to decide for our students too. So what works for our students in math class for a particular math task might not work for a writing task in English language arts class. Finally, tools are an important part to consider. There are certain tools that might successfully support students when they're looking to achieve the task, but also knowing what's already in place. So you might find that by adding a particular tool, it actually makes something more difficult. Examples of this, could be, we have students in certain classrooms that maybe by 2nd or 3rd grade are used to using the touch screen. If you change from an iPad to a Chromebook that's not touchscreen, in order to have an additional app that works better on a Chromebook, your student might be missing that touchscreen, and so it might be the wrong tool for your student in that respect, because they need the function of the touchscreen. The same thing is also true for students who are used to having a keyboard and maybe switch to, say, an iPad that doesn't have the keyboard. So making sure you know what tools are available and how they impact the use of a particular program or device that your students might be using. You also have to consider what it takes to learn how to use the tool. I'm sure you can imagine a time where you've maybe even purchased something at IKEA where you realized the effort it will take to follow these directions to put this together. What's the learning curve for our students to use that tool? So a graphing calculator, we have to do instruction for each step to teach the student how to use the graphing calculator. We have to decide, is this a tool that takes too long to teach and we should just teach the students to do it by hand, or vice versa? So just in any content area, we really have to make good decisions about how we are implementing that tool across technology. So I have a quick video for you all that just kind of talks about the SET framework and what it can look like in action for our students when it comes to assistive technology. So I'm going to start this video here and then we'll debrief it a little bit after.
Every child is unique, and the AT each child uses needs to fit their individual needs. The SET framework is designed to help
Sorry.
you make that decision, taking into consideration the child, the environment, the tasks needed to be accomplished, and the AT tools that are available. Here's an example of how SET can be put to use.
Okay, let's go to our seats to the table, guys. Thank you.
Here we can see a preschool classroom transitioning from one activity to another.
Mario, go to your seat.
While the teacher's verbal prompt is sufficient for most children, Mario is struggling to understand what is expected of him. There's a constant struggle for Mario and for the teacher, who has to continuously redirect him.
Look, we're gonna sit. Mario.
So how do we consider our AT options for Mario? Start with the child. What are Mario's strengths? Weaknesses? When available, refer to the child's IEP. Next, consider his environment. When and where is Mario struggling with transitions? Does it happen between circle time to snack time? Or between multiple settings such as classroom to the playground? Are the difficulties with transitions happening when the directions are given to the whole group, just him, or both? Are the environmental arrangements in the room making it easy for Mario to understand where he needs to go from activity to activity? Once that has been determined, break down the tasks into manageable goals. What are your goals for Mario? In this case, the teacher wants to help Mario learn to transition without disruptions. Does Mario understand what's expected of him when he's transitioning from one activity to the next? Finally, let's consider our AT options.
Guys, circle time is over. And now it's snack time.
Since Mario thrives when offered visual choices, would Mario benefit from having an individualized picture schedule that shows him which activity comes next? Or use a visual timer to indicate when activities are finished?
It's time to stop.
Maybe the teacher could offer an auditory cue,
So snack time.
such as a repetitive song or ringing of a bell, to alert the children and Mario it's time to transition from one activity to the next. Also, given Mario enjoys socializing with peers, the teacher could pair Mario with a buddy who's good at following directions to model what's expected during transition time. Mario could have a job, such as passing out materials or arrange chairs for an activity to give him something positive to do during the inevitable wait time. Or maybe show clearly labeled pictures all across the classroom marking designated areas where the children need to go. Once we choose which AT tool to try, it's important for the teacher to keep track of what's working or not working so the AT plan can be adjusted as needed.
Time to go outside, so we're gonna stand up and make a line.
Remember, AT consideration and implementation is a fluid process that requires trying it out to find out what works best for the child.
Nikki, I just want to note that earlier, Sheila said she uses direct feedback through tokens given on a visual schedule. So
Oh, that's great.
wanted to link what she had said with what we just saw.
Absolutely. And that is one of the pieces that I wanted to highlight when it comes to that is, I'm going to go back to the set manual page. Sorry if you're dizzy. I want to go to the set framework page again, just to kind of debrief in the video. Some things that I notice when I show this video with other groups is they comment on the idea that we think of assistive technology as technology and app, a technology we hold in our hands like our phones or our iPads, but also sometimes assistive technology is technology we use as teachers to facilitate the instructional process for our students. So we noticed the picture visual schedule that the students had in that Mario had in that particular video. The teacher used technology to create that, and it is an example of assistive technology, but not everything we do has to be putting a new screen or a new app in front of our students. Are there any other points of debrief, John or Alana, that you wanted to add to that?
Nope. I think it was great.
Okay. All right, so hopefully that gave you an idea to sort of think through the SET framework and how we can use it to meet the assistive instructional technology needs of our students. Some things to know for when it comes to having these implementation resources is that there are lots of really great resources available for you. Step Up AT is the one who created the video that you just watched, and there are some resources here. Their coaching manual, their coaching crosswalks, as well as the teacher resources that they have there. They are all really wonderful. If you're looking for resources for creating visual schedules, if you're looking for ways to write goals based on some of this assistive technology, all of that is available there at their website, Step Up AT. And that's available to you. These are all links and in there. And I actually thought that we had a link to our Padlet in here, but I don't remember going through it. I apologize. I'll make sure that you have that link here at the end in the chat, but all of our slides are available on our Padlet so that you have these linkable resources to go through. I have not written an IEP recently, but I love their section on how to write goals and progress monitor with that use of assistive technology. It's a really great resource available for teachers. Some other things to consider that were highlighted in the video is to really look at the purpose and structure, making sure we know we're choosing technology that really matters for our students, not just choosing what's available, choosing what we know will work. So there are schools that I work with that all the students will have Chromebooks, but certain students maybe need a touchscreen version of a Chromebook, or maybe they need an iPad instead because of a particular app or something that works better. Making sure that we're using technology to break down barriers for students and not create extra barriers for students. Sometimes we find that there's a new piece of technology that sounds like a great idea till we actually start using it, and then what we realize is that it actually makes life a little bit harder. An example of that, when I was teaching, this has been a while, but one of the big things to do for students in my ELA classrooms when I first started teaching really was to provide this word processor for students, and it seemed like a great piece of technology. It was a word processor, so students would type on a typewriter onto a small screen. It would show up, and then they would be able to print it through our copiers in the building. We'd connect it with a wire. It's been a while on this one, but what we found with those students is that these were students who were able to write in the classroom, and we were trying to help make the process faster for them. What we found is that word processing device did not actually make it faster for most of our students. One student in particular, I remember the frustration he expressed because at the time, the word processor only showed about one sentence at a time. So he, with his working memory, was having to remember what he typed 2 or 3 sentences prior, and it just wasn't appropriate for this 6th grader. He needed to see it all at once. That particular student actually found that even though it took longer, he was willing to actually write it out. And again, this was before laptops and things became, more prevalent in our classrooms. Again, it was early in my teaching career. That ages me a bit. So those sorts of things are things to keep in mind. If you notice a particular technology application actually being a barrier for your students, it's time to reassess and to have a different conversation. How can we implement this differently? And how can we really make it work for the student, or just stop using it if it's not working for the student? So making sure there's that continuous cycle of we're choosing a technology, a piece of assistive technology, we're looking at how it's being implemented, and then we're assessing if that's effective or not. Consider ways that we can also use UDL in this conversation, in this process for your students. Encouraging your general education teachers as well as special education teachers to really consider UDL. If the assignment is to write a 5-paragraph essay, are there times when our students can instead create that as a video? You know, they still have to outline it. They still have to be able to give it as a speech, the content. But are we grading the writing piece of it, or are we grading the content? So keeping that in mind is keeping the same goal for everyone at the end, but wondering if our students can have different access points through the use of that technology just in a different manner. Also considering ways that UDL might using assistive technology in UDL might address needs that your other students who don't have IEPs might actually benefit from. So just having that choice really is a friend of inclusion and a friend of success for all of our students. Some things to keep in mind with the pillars of UDL when we encourage student success are to have multiple means of engagement. So this could be that for some of your students, they are engaged by technology. Other students might feel, say, like over technology, and they might be engaged more by working with a group, or maybe perhaps by, seeing the paper copy of something and, and looking at looking at it that way. Also multiple means of representation. So this is how we're able to give our students content. Maybe our students are not willing or able with their attention spans. They don't want to sit and listen to us all this time. So instead, we have to give them different ways of kind of accessing that content, whether that's through a pre-recorded video that they could pause and replay when needed for attention considerations, or maybe it's even using that technology as a teacher to make sure that we have several different ways. So if the students are not engaging in, say, a longer lecture, maybe we've got a couple minutes of content and then students get to, from the teacher, and then a couple minutes of students get to explore perhaps, a piece of text or a short video online or a podcast. So all of those things are options. And finally, considering how our students can show us what they know in different ways. So again, could that student the assignment that was an essay, could that instead be a speech, a PowerPoint presentation, all of those different options as there. Again, UDL is available through the UDL framework is available through the CAST website. And it's got lots of great resources for you. Including some things when it comes to assistive tech. So I want to pause here for a moment and just kind of think about all those technology pieces that you discussed at the beginning, those things that came to mind that you use in your classroom. And I just wonder, how do they fit into this UDL framework? Do you have more assistive technology that helps with engagement, more that helps with representation, some things that help with action and expression? So the quick chat, I just want you to think about what tech is currently in place and how it fits into these categories. Do you have a category of strength or weakness that we can be aware of as for personal growth? Not that you have to post that in the chat, but just kind of give me, where do you have most of your assistive technology? Is it more for engagement, representation, or action and expression? If you can, throw that in the chat, and I'll rely on John and Alana to help me out here with what's in there.
Or feel free to speak up.
Absolutely. Feel free to unmute and share.
As you were speaking, and as folks are thinking, students, we can empower students too to be metacognitive and advocate for themselves as far as engagement. We had students that would during independent work would put up screens or would put on earphones because they recognized that they needed that quiet or that screen to eliminate distractions. So when students can advocate for themselves on representation, it would help if you would do such and such, being able to discourse with that student or students about, because they know themselves better than we do, what's going to work for them.
Great point, John. Making sure that they understand why we're using these things really helps as well, so that they can advocate for themselves outside of our classrooms. Yeah.
And they don't see themselves as different. We're all different.
I can share from my own teaching experience that I feel like I was very good when I look at a chart like this. I was good at that multiple means of engagement and action and expression. But really, I felt pretty solidly, I didn't have a lot of variety in how I represented the content for students. I did have shorter chunks of content. It was never a 45-minute lecture or anything like that. But with my 5th and 6th graders, I feel like a lot of the representation piece where I was giving them the content was just me kind of talking. And I think back about ways I could have, if I realized that that was the weakness, ways I would have made adjustments when I saw a visual representation of it like this. I can recognize that that was, of the 3, my weakness. So thank you. I can't tell anyone sharing in the chat anything I should share, John or Alana.
I just put that I use Nearpod, and then somebody else, because for representation, pause it and I can put them in groups. They can do it on their own. So I did try to do a good job with the representation, but Michelle put her teachers use Google Platform on iPad. So depending on the class, they will use Docs, Slide Sheets, Nearpods, Keynote, Bookits, and Kahoot. So it sounds like Michelle says they vary, lots of different things for engagement.
That's amazing. Keeping them with different options really has such a great piece to it, Michelle, because what we know is just like we get burned out on things, they get burned out on certain tech pieces, right? Alana and I were in a school once where the kids did Bookits all day long. They were so sick of Bookits by the end of the day. You know, they were not as engaged. What was fun in first hour was not fun by 7th hour. So yeah, great job with including that variety piece of it in there. I love it. Thank you all for sharing. Sorry. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alana, who's going to cover HLP number 20.
Great. And William already said no noise reducing headphones, Moat, which Moat, I love Moat because you can give feedback to them with your own words and your voice. So probably like William, my students would actually listen to me a little bit, and our principals would actually give us feedback through our emails through Moat sometimes too, because if they did walkthroughs or they did like what's something you did good or something that you need help with. A long email sometimes you wouldn't read. We'd kind of like look at it a little bit and then we'd kind of stop. But when we would do it through Moat, you could hear voices, and I'm sure William probably thinks the same, but my students like that better, and I liked it as a teacher getting feedback from my principal. I thought that was great. So thanks, that's awesome. High leverage practice number 20, database individual. We're going to talk about individualization, which is a really long word, so we're just going to say DBI with cycles of progress monitoring. So we're going to use tiered instructional system to provide intervention without removing them from the core curriculum. And intense interventions will focus on critical skills deficit. So that is a little bit about high leverage practice number 20. There is 5 steps in this high leverage practice. So we're going to go through each step and talk about what it looks like when you are trying to increase skills for students in your classroom and not taking them away or pushing them out or into a different classroom to receive the services. We're really going to see how we can do this, intensify this to make the students increase their skills based on different things. And we're going to talk about this, but this is high leverage practice number 20, and there are 5 steps. So we're going to move on to the next. And I do have a couple of videos on this one. So in practice, intensifying intervention, we can do it in many different ways. You can reduce the size of the instructional group. You can add instructional time to focus on a specific skill. You can use additional interventions beyond the interventions in Tier 1 and Tier 2. And students receiving individualized feedback on their programs by the team that is working with the student. So it really very much is that team approach, not just the teachers, but if you guys have had data meetings, this is what we're going to talk about with intensive interventions. And research states that it could take learners with significant needs 10 to 30 times longer than students without significant needs to learn the material. I thought that was huge. I don't know what you guys think, but 10 to 30 times longer than students without significant needs to learn the material. So that means they need so much more practice, so much more feedback, all of those things. So really, this is intensive intervention. These are for those students that take a lot longer to learn those skills. So we have to do the best we can do with the time that we have, which we know. So this is kind of a systematic approach to this intensive intervention. What is it? How do we do it? And it really is a system, and it's circular. So you go to the bottom and you kind of go back up to the top. So it is a system, and we're going to go through the 5 steps. So the first part is DBI or database individualized is implementing a level appropriate secondary prevention program. We're going to monitor progress. We're going to examine diagnostic data. We're going to plan adaptations, and we're going to cycle through it through the core activities. So like I said, it's a system. And this was just from a trifold that we have, but it's kind of small, so it's hard to see a little bit. But we're going to go step by step to exactly what that looks like. I have a video on a couple of the steps, but we first pick a program, and we're going to go all the way through it and talk about what that means. But it really is a system. It really works the best when we know that a group of students in your class have a specific skill that you're going to work on. We have to know where they're starting. We have to get a goal, and we have to make sure that we take progress monitoring to get to that goal. And then there are things that happen if students make it. We're going to keep on going. And if students are not making progress, we're going to talk about what can we do with that. So it really is a 5-step process, and I'm going to break it down into each step, and that we can use in our classrooms to get those skills up for those students. This is step 1. So this is step 1. And while we're watching this video, I want you, it's only a couple of minutes. It starts from 8:01 to 10:07. But it is really, the first step is to select and implement an appropriate program for the skill that you want to teach. So if you have a resource classroom, I taught middle school. So there are students that, that I had a resource classroom. And I wish I would have done it like this more than I did. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. We did more of homework help. So a lot of the students would come to my resource class and they'd have to finish all their different things. And I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I would try to do a bunch of different things in the 20-minute resource class. And that's really not helpful to increase skills for students, right? So I know if I would have gone back, if I could do this again, I would focus on a skill that my students had in common. Even though they were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we know that all those students need help on maybe comprehension or maybe identifying central idea. There is something that it doesn't matter what grade level they are, but there are some skills that they could work on. So them coming to me for resource, we could have worked on these skills. And this is the step 1 of how you would do that as an intensive intervention. So we're going to select and implement a program. And they're going to be research-based. It's going to be something that we know works for the skill. And then we're going to implement it as it said. So here we're going to see a teacher. She's going to be teaching a skill to students, and she's going to be using a systematic approach to doing this. And in the chat, if you guys could just notice anything that the teacher's doing with that group. The teachers are doing, the students are doing, anything that you want to so you can just kind of use the chat if you can. And we're going to talk about the step 1. And programs should align with the skill needed regardless of grade level. So anything that they're doing to monitor this or to show this, please put that in the chat. So I'm going to have Nikki started at 8:01. It's just about a minute and a half. Sorry, we have to go through it a little bit.
At Florida State University. Watch as Ms. Jill Ozog guides a small group of students in blending and segmenting words as they learn about syllables. She first models this skill and then guides her students in practice. The students are using manipulatives and have multiple opportunities to practice and receive feedback while engaging in this evidence-based curriculum.
Ready? Okay, remember we've been talking about syllables, and syllables are parts of the word, okay? Okay. Remember, the words are broken down, so I want you to watch me. I'm going to say the word flower. Flower, okay? Now, can you say flower?
Flower.
Okay, now we're going to break flower apart. Flower. Okay, now watch. Are you watching? I'm going to blend it back together. Flower. Okay. Flower. Right, now let's read flower. Okay, now I'm going to let you try. Okay, so I'm going to give you the cards. I want you to line up the cards together. All right. Okay, so they're together. Ready? The word is monkey. Say monkey.
Monkey.
Okay, separate the word by syllable. Monkey. Okay, now blend it back together.
Monkey.
Okay, say turtle.
Turtle.
Okay, let's break it apart.
Turtle.
Okay, let's blend it back together.
Turtle.
Great job. Let's try apple.
Apple.
Okay, let's blend it back together.
Apple.
Good job. Let's try the word puppet. First syllable, pup.
Puppet.
Okay, blend it back together.
Puppet.
Okay, and let's try apple. Ready, go. No, wait, we're going too fast. Let's try again. First syllable,
Apple.
Second syllable, pull. Let's blend it back together.
Apple.
Okay, watch me. Apple. Apple. Let's try together. Ready? First syllable,
Apple.
Second syllable, pull. Blend it together.
Apple.
Good job.
The second step of the DBI process.
Yeah, so she was saying, is this assuming that these students do not have IEPs, which would dictate the skills that need to be worked on? Yeah, they could or they could not. I mean, there could be, you could do this in tier 1 in the gen ed classroom. You can pull students that have a skill deficit, or depending on if you do like win time, what I need time. Some students needing the same skill, you can group them together. Some of the students have IEPs, some of them might not. In my resource class, we didn't use it the way that I think that we could have, I guess. This is just a way to use it in your school, that you could have students with IEPs or not have to work on specific skills if they're identified or not. It could be anybody, if that happens in your school, and not all schools do that. But yes, I appreciate that, Sheila. And then Michelle said it's systematic, evidence-based, it's segmenting, it's blending. We know a specific skill. William said, I do it, we do it, you do it, the gradual release model that we all know and love. And John reinforces, confirms understanding through repeating the word and providing multiple opportunities for practice. And explicit instruction, Michelle said too. And we just talked about how 10 to 30 times more that students with disabilities have to practice that. So if some of these kids do have IEPs and they do have disabilities, that's going to very much help them in that small group practice and get that feedback from the teacher. So thank you guys for engaging in that. It is. So step 1 is selecting and implementing an appropriate program. So we're honed in on a specific skill. The teacher has a small group. She modeled it like you said. If you saw, she had like a script underneath, so she probably had to say certain things and do certain things for it to be, when it's research-based, you have to deliver it in a certain way. And that's why a lot of times when we have our programs at schools, teachers have to follow that script, which sometimes teachers find not that great, but it's because when it's delivered the way that it's supposed to be, that should get the results that it says in the research. So that is hopefully going to happen with these kids with these gains. You can go to the second step. Nikki, thank you. So now we have to monitor progress. So before we do this, we have to make sure that if I have a group of students that we just looked at, those 6 students, I need to know where they are when they're blending those words. I need to know their pre-assessment. And then we're going to have to, obviously, we're going to have to progress monitor them as we go on. So we're going to administer short assessments to track whether they are making progress. So if that is every Friday, if you guys have a data team meeting, that's the things that you would talk about. You choose a progress monitoring system that has reliability and validity. So making sure that we write things down and we're going to see, okay, these kids are making it and these kids aren't, but that would be the step 2. We're going to select an outcome measure that best aligns with the focus of the intervention program. Like I said, some of these programs have like, how much growth do you expect to see if we're giving it this time of day for 5 days, depending on what you're going to give. But you have to set a goal and a timeline and measure progress on a weekly basis. So honestly, when I had data meetings a long time ago, like Nikki, I'm a little bit old. I've been, what do I like to call myself? Seasoned. And our data meetings were not that systematic. We would talk about the problems in our classroom, or we would kind of get off track, like, well, they're not engaged in this program, they're this and that. So we're trying to shift it to, what is the progress looking like? Are they making it or not? And then we're going to figure out the why not. But it really is data. It's really evidence. we have to evaluate that data to answer that question, because I think that a lot of times our data meetings they were not as focused as this. It got better as my leadership changed, but we have to think about this in step 2. Are we going to see the progress? Are we not? But that is step 2. So we're gonna pick a program, then we're gonna implement it. Then we're gonna say, okay, what's going on? We're gonna look at that data. So we're gonna go to the next slide, and I'm gonna kind of show you what a data, maybe a PLC would look like in a second. We're going to examine diagnostics assessment data also. So you can in functional data to determine that the academic and behavioral skill deficits impacting performance teams will consider. So classroom work samples and assessments we can look at. We know teachers can see when you're working with a small group what students are engaged, what students are not. Teachers have a lot of data just by looking at the kids and by knowing when they're engaged and things like that. So writing that down. And so we can use standardized assessment tools. And then we're going to develop a hypothesis about the reasons for the students' difficulties. So in that group, say there were 6 students, 4 of them are doing okay. We're having the data meetings, they're going up and they're doing all right. So there's 1 or 2 students that they're not responding to that evidence-based practice. That's when we have to decide, why not? Is it because during that small group, I can tell that these 2 students are all over the place. They can't keep their hands to themselves. They're not paying attention. So do I need to add something? And that's my teacher brain. Do I need to add some sensory breaks? Do I need to add some sensory stickers? Do I need to add a visual schedule? So step 3 is really thinking about those students that as I know as a teacher, I'm in that small group. I know what's going on when I'm delivering that instruction. Maybe I'm delivering that instruction after lunch and my student's medicine is wearing off, because we know that happens. So maybe I should flip it to the morning when he's a little bit more focused. There's all kinds of things you can think about, but that is step 3 about how we're going to develop a hypothesis about the reasons for the student's difficulties. Step 3. That's a lot of examples. So I'm going to give you an example. This is, again, only a couple minutes from 12 to 14 to look at data. And this would be a way that if your data team is looking at data, this is kind of the kinds of questions that we would ask.
Playing the role of Steve's teacher, shares data with the... In this video, Dr. Erica Lemke facilitates a mock data meeting with Michigan's Integrated Behavior and Learning Support Initiative personnel. This clip shows the team describing the current intervention program of Steve, a fictitious student. Ms. Courtney Buck, playing the role of Steve's teacher, shares data with the team detailing his current performance, while other members of the team offer additional details about his intervention history.
And do you want to talk a little bit about the graph data?
Oh, sure. So we've been measuring his progress on a few different measures throughout the year. One is nonsense word fluency, where we are looking at is he able to use sort of that letter sound correspondence to figure out not real words that aren't real. And so we are seeing, his goal is set pretty high. If you're on page 6, you can see he can say those letter sounds. He's getting about 34 correct in a minute right now. He started out in September at about 28. So we are seeing progress, not quite at the point where he's on track to meet that goal that we have established by about the middle of January. But we are seeing progress, which is good. So if we're looking at his more current data, for nonsense word fluency, whole letters read, we can see that he's making progress above our aim line, which is really good. We see that he's stagnating just a little bit where he is right now, but we have seen that he continues to be above that aim line, so we are happy with that progress. Just like Mr. Vail said, we're seeing progress. Okay? So if you flip over to page 13, you will see oral reading fluency, correct words per minute. And you'll see again that he continues to make progress. He's again below that aim line or trajectory line where we want to see him to be on track to meet that goal in January. But in general, again, continues to make pretty consistent progress. Last couple data points again have stagnated a little bit, but we are seeing some of those possible motivation issues playing into possibly the assessment. Now, what we're really celebrating is his accuracy in first grade material. So if you've looked at page 14, you'll see that he, just like Mr. Vale said, that he's reading very accurately, or his accuracy is improving quite a great deal in first grade materials. So again, keeping in mind that he's being monitored on first grade materials here, and we're in second grade, which is why we don't always see that transfer into our materials, but we are really celebrating that his accuracy has improved.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Nikki. So that would be kind of a data meeting, a team meeting. That's what we focus on. Why are the students not making progress? I love how they celebrated the fact that, yeah, he's in second grade, but he's doing pretty good in first grade, but hey, he's making some growth. And my data, I'm just talking for myself, my data team meetings didn't always look like that. I don't know if yours did, but that would be step 3 in action. That would be talking about the data, talking about what things could be happening, and we'll move on to step 4. So that's where I talked about planning adaptations for interventions that are not working. So we can think about this in a couple of ways. So if I have a student that was not making progress, and I'm the teacher, and I'm going to say, all right, well, I'm delivering this specific program 10 minutes a day, and the students barely engaged for 10 minutes. My dosage, increasing that, might not be the best route for me. So how could I engage him a little bit more? And like I said, I always think about sensory things. Could he have some sensory stickers? Could he have a visual? Could something else happen for him so that they can be more engaged? If I'm giving my, if I have resource class last hour and these students, like I said, some of my kids had a harder time in the afternoon after lunch, can I change it to the morning? You can make some of these adaptations if it's possible with your schedule, but those are just problem solving some of those kinds of things. The alignment, is my program that I'm using aligned to the skill that I need? If it needs to be research based on that specific skill that you want to increase. Is it transferring to the gen ed? If I'm pulling them or when they're with their whole group, am I pulling my students? How are they doing in my class versus, or when I'm pulled with them? Are they still using those strategies out with all the other students without being reminded? Do I need to have my para know what's going on in my small group so that we can use those all together? Use of explicit instruction, we talked about that. You guys hit that on the head in the chat. So you guys have heard Nikki talk about explicit instruction before. Am I modeling? Am I using that gradual release model? Am I looking at my script and I'm making sure I'm delivering it the way it's supposed to be? And of course, the behavior support is not just, well, he's not motivated by this program, but it really is, how can I support his behavior so that he can get what he needs from me in that small group? So that would be step 4, adapting what you're doing when it's not working. I talk a lot for the little steps. Step 5, last step. So this is just, again, like I told you at the beginning, it's a cycle. It's through the core activities. And really we need to write it down like, okay, Monday I gave it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I gave this instruction. I did it every day for 10 minutes. The teacher was there every time. These 3 students that aren't making progress, or 2 students, they have an attendance problem, or they have a behavior, what is going on? But really it's writing all those things down so that when I have that meeting at the end of the month and I'm saying these 2 students are still not getting it, we've done this with fidelity, this whole program for the whole month, maybe I need to try a different program. Maybe I need to try something else. But I really need to write these things down so that I know that the student was there, they were engaged, they were trying, I did it the way I could do it the best I could. They weren't missing a lot of school. They weren't, all of these kinds of things. And that would be step 5. And then you kind of go back to step 1 again. So then you pick a different one for these 2 kids that's not working for. But hopefully for the majority of your students, you're going to see that gain when you have this systematic approach to all of these things. So that is all of the 5 steps that you would do maybe in a resource class or in a class or in your own class when you're working on win time, when I need time. What skill deficits do these students have? You have the pre-assessment, you have a plan, you write everything down, and then you go back to the drawing board if it doesn't work, but that is the 5 steps in this HLP. And then, does anybody have any questions? Please put it in the chat or comments. If not, we're going to move on to John for the last one. Oh, sorry, we're not. Monitor, I thought that was the last one. So I kind of talked about that through that. So we're going to go with John.
All right.
Practice.
Number 22. When we look at feedback today, feedback is such a broad topic. I'm going to look at feedback in the realm of the classroom. Alana talked about feedback that a group would look at, your team would look at, analyze student work, develop a plan for a particular student or a group of students. What I'm going to look at is that high leverage practice, that feedback that occurs during the course of instruction. So before I begin with the purpose of feedback, I want to make sure that we understand that feedback is really a reciprocal approach. You are getting feedback from students, and you are giving feedback to them with respect to their learning. When I would sit down with teachers after I would observe a classroom, one of the questions I would ask, and they knew this, and after a while, they were attuned to what I was going to ask, and it really helped them reflect on their instruction. And that question was, what did you learn from your students? What did you learn from your students during that class? And over time, the teachers were really self-reflective, were really evaluating it and really self-evaluating, reflecting on their practice. And that helped them hone their skills on the strategies they were using, the amount of planning they were doing. Were they effectively planning? Were they in advance thinking of those breakdown points during a particular lesson? I use the example all the time, but changing improper fractions to mixed numbers. Oh, wow. When we talk about the difference between fractions and whole numbers, I know that's going to be a sticking point. So if you know that's the case, they have given you feedback in the past about that being a problem. You've seen it a little bit during instruction you've had leading up to this point. Let's plan instruction so that we mitigate that misunderstanding on the front end, because that's what instruction is all about. So it does require us as teachers to have a crystal clear understanding of the content and the skills that students are to know and to learn, because only when we have that crystal clear understanding of the content and the skills can we then zero in on whether or not those students are learning, becoming proficient, developing skills toward proficiency in that content and skills. So that clarity is so important. But I just wanted to open with that question. It dawned on me actually during the presentation as we were talking earlier about that question I used to ask. But the purpose of feedback really is to close the gap between where students are and where that desired outcome is. And as I said, that desired outcome is that crystal clear understanding of what must students know and be able to do. And it provides us getting feedback from them on their level of understanding. We then reciprocally can provide feedback, encouragement, prompting, and instructional feedback responses to where the students are to help them on that journey between where they are and where we want them to be. So leverage 22, that positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. It's all about them giving us feedback and us responding to that feedback if you really want to look at it holistically. All right, next slide. Okay, monitoring. Effective feedback is all about monitoring, consistent monitoring. And that means that we are looking at the oral and written responses that we're getting, as well as the nonverbals that we're getting from students as far as our instruction. Again, I would have teachers that would tell me during our post-observation sessions, I could tell at the point when I was losing them because, and I just kind of smile and and then I would ask appropriate questions. So if you were in that lesson again and you saw that you were losing them, what might you do? What would you do differently? And I would probe with those questions for them, again, to see if they were self-evaluating, self-reflecting, and being able to self-correct or improve, I should say correct, but self-improve on what they were doing. So that monitoring the oral and written responses are vital. I do want to note here that not all oral responses are effective. Questions, teachers will ask 200 to 300 questions a day, I think was the study. But very few of those are questions that get to the heart of the content students are to learn. Often what we're seeing is teachers will ask and answer questions. So how many of you, there'll be yes or no. Do you understand that? Or it will be, how many of you have ever seen those types of questions, but they're not getting to the heart of the content. So if we're really going to monitor student understanding, we have to make sure that we frame those questions that get to the content and skills they're to learn. And that's when, and that's only when, we can gain that information about students' understanding. We then, as a result of that, can provide accurate and prompt corrective feedback. Two terms, accurate and prompt. And that accurate goes again to the heart of what I started with, and that is us truly understanding the content so we can zero in on that breakdown point. You'll see an example in a moment. That breakdown point of where that student is misunderstanding so that we can correct just that. It also then, that monitoring allows us to adjust our instruction within the lesson, like I mentioned before, when I would ask the teachers to self-reflect. And I saw, like I said, I saw as a result of that, teachers were self-correcting or monitoring their instruction more closely and making adjustments on the fly, not only when I was in the room, but even just walking through the room or going in to help them out with something. Okay. So monitoring is a part of feedback. I mean, it's an essential part of that feedback, and it's the purpose. We monitor during explicit instruction and independent work. And again, those oral responses, choral is great. You want to see who does. You saw in the slides or in that one video, for example, the choral response. It was a small group and they were responding all at once, but the teacher was not listening necessarily. She was listening, but she was also watching what they were doing, and she was watching those together. She was putting what they were doing there and what they were saying together to ensure that they truly understood that syllabication, that concept of syllabication, those two simple words. And then, of course, written responses. Those can be large groups, small groups, individual. It is critical that instruction or that feedback is specific. For example, when I see the term individual written responses, when we're looking at homework, that we're very specific. I use the example on this for this when I was teaching. Maybe I've used this before, and I apologize if I have. But when I was teaching mathematics in 6th grade, one of the things I would do is I would take their homework home, and I would put a letter on top of their paper that represented a specific error they were making. Let's say place value borrowing across the tens place, that might be a J. And if they're, addition of eights, wow. Okay, that might be a K, and they might, also that place value, again, the borrowing across the tens. That student might have J and K. So I would just randomly put these letters down and jot for myself what those letters meant, prepare a quick mini lesson, intense mini lesson, and that next day, then when I would go back, students I would have a brain teaser up there. They could work together as a team on that brain teaser that related to what we were working on, the concept we were working on. I would call the students back. Have a mini lesson. Hey, I see if you have a J, come on back. And we would be looking at, let's say, borrowing across the tens. So I would give them a quick, I do, we do, you do mini lesson, very specific, very explicit, very direct. Observe what they were doing. Great. Hey, I'll tell you what, here's one to work on your own. Head back. Hey, why don't you stay here? I see that you also have a K. All right, just stay right here. And then I would work with that next group of students. My point is, I was looking at their individual written responses and I was responding individually to them, yet I could do that within a group. But it was timely. It was that next day I was able to respond to them. It wasn't 2 days later. It wasn't something that I wrote that they had to then interpret. Remember to, when you regroup, to whatever. It wasn't written for them. It was very quick. It was explicit. It was direct, and it was intended on, or it was intended for instructional purposes. That feedback was instructional in nature. Again, providing them with feedback even as I watched them. So. Okay, so explicit instruction, independent work, oral responses, again, written responses as they're doing work independently within the classroom. Okay, next slide. Providing feedback, correct responses, we want to affirm and move on. We don't want to belabor the point. We want to affirm and hopefully as explicitly as we can, something like, hey, I see you're writing those complete sentences. We may want to affirm and reteach. I see we're writing those complete sentences, and you have an adjective that you've added. Remember, adjectives describe the noun, and wow, brown jacket, very good. But we want to just affirm and move on. Incorrect responses, when we say a response that's incorrect, we want to restate, talk about an application of a strategy or rule. For example, we may say the word. That's an example of responding to an incorrect response. For example, the student says, I don't know, that for thought. We would simply say thought. We would simply say the word for that student, and then guide the students to the correct answer. And again, that is. But when we do that, and it's hard to explain in this very short time or to give you an example, but that restatement, that application, in the case of reading, saying the word, but guiding the students to the correct answer, you're going to see an example here in a minute, is critical so that the students right away understand exactly what they must do differently to understand or to be proficient in that concept or skill. All right. Next slide. All right. Prompts and requests. There are terminating and there are affirming or initiating responses that we can give. The initiating requests are positive. They're instructive in nature. They encourage the student, whereas terminating requests are negative. They shut the student down. Here's some examples. Of those 6, which ones are initiating? I don't have them numbered, but we can go 1 through 6, I guess. Or you can say .1. What would be initiating? Encouraging, instructional, positive? Just jot it in chat or say it. Number 3. Art teacher might say, you're not using the vanishing point right for the 3-dimensional perspective. Initiating or terminating? Alana, you can respond if you'd like.
People are writing in the chat.
Yeah, I see that now. Yeah, definitely terminating.
We're
It's-
giving wait time.
Yeah, that's what I was practicing. I was trying to demonstrate some waiting for feedback. Definitely terminating responses. Sheila says 1, 1, 4, 5, and 6. 1 are initiating. Yeah, it's interesting because 6 is a question, but it's an initiating question because it's causing the student or asking the student to think about what they've written. So the point is during those prompts. Remember I said we want to, if it's correct, we want to affirm and move on. So we might say. Yeah, quotation marks are placed right before and after what the character says. That might be for a student who has done that correctly. It also then might be an initiating response for a student with correction for a student who has not correctly placed the quotation marks. By pointing with our finger, quotation marks are placed right before and after what the character says. So that can affirm what a student's done correctly. It can also be used for correction by simply pointing, having the student add that, and then coming back around to make sure that they do understand it is before and after what a student says. The whole point of prompts are to encourage and to provide instruction for students. Encourage and provide instruction for students. And by doing that, by using initiating requests or prompts, we do that. Terminating defeats the purpose of instruction. It actually points out what they're doing incorrectly. And we don't want them to dwell on what they've not done correctly. We want them to focus on what is correct and provide that corrective instruction. Okay. An example. Let's say, Mary, we have been teaching in 2nd grade, underline the noun, circle the verb. As you're walking around, Michelle, Sheila, William, you're walking around, Alana, and you see the student response on the right. We tend to want to focus on what is incorrect. We just do that naturally. That's what's wrong. My wife does that with me. Here's what's wrong. No, let's look at what I'm doing well, please. So you notice that here we're going to focus on the words. First of all, I'm sorry, the focus here, when I say focus, I mean what must the student know and be able to do? Nouns, verbs. That's the focus of the lesson. But I'm going to focus my praise, or I'm going to focus my initial response on what the student has done correctly. Oh, Mary, you have a complete sentence telling who, Marcus, did something, rode. You notice what I did there? I would point to Marcus, who, even though she doesn't have it underlined, who, Marcus, rode the bike. You have a complete sentence. Then I'm going to prompt with reteaching. A noun names a person. I would point to Marcus. What does a noun name? A person. You should say place or thing. Marcus is the person who rode. Who's the person who rode? She'd say Marcus. Yes. So Marcus is the noun because that's the name of the person who did something. Marcus rode. And then you would underline that with your finger, and then Mary would underline that. Initially, again, that feedback is Mary telling me where that breakdown point is. That is just as important, and me interpreting that correctly is just as important as the feedback that I give her, because the feedback I give her will depend on how well I have interpreted and how thoroughly I understand exactly what Mary must know and be able to do in this case is to identify what a noun is in a sentence, or where nouns are in sentences, and what verbs do and where they are in a sentence. So that feedback she gives me, I then give her that feedback, and I do it in a positive way, an instructional way, a way that initiates her then to move on to another sentence and hopefully do that correctly. But I'm going to watch that again. I'm going to be watching her, and it may require more intense I do, you do, we do instruction along the way if she's not understanding. Thoughts, questions on that? I know I ran through that pretty quickly, trying to be considerate of your time. When we talk about feedback, we want to make sure that it is positive and constructive. Imagine a student who sits in a class all day and hears, "That's wrong." You're not supposed to borrow across the, you have to start with the tens when you're borrowing. When you're looking at ones, you have to talk about beating a student down. We want our feedback, first of all, to be accurate, that we get from the student about where the student breakdown point is, but we want to make sure that it is positive and constructive to the students. That means it's going to be clear, it's going to be very specific, it's going to be focused on what the student is doing, it's going to be immediate. It's going to be, when we say goal directed, it's going to be directed toward that goal of that feedback. The whole purpose is where the student is, where we want them to be. It's going to be focused on that goal of proficiency and growth. If you're looking at a student with a IEP, perfect example of watching somebody giving explicit direct feedback in a timely manner directed toward a goal. Go watch your SLPs. Sit in on a session with your speech language pathologist. We want to focus on the misunderstandings, but not to the point of the student reinforcing that misunderstanding. We will focus on it. We're not going to have them focus on it. We will focus on it, but provide positive and corrective instruction. And that could be whether it's written, whether it's oral, or whether they're doing. For example, in basketball, if we are teaching layups, we're going to focus on, I see the breakdowns point of where that student is, the student is faltering when he's trying to shoot a layup. I'm going to focus on what he has to do differently, not what he is doing wrong when I provide that feedback. And we're also going to use that feedback, like I said, when I would ask the teachers to monitor and to adjust our own instruction. Okay, next slide. So it's about 16 after, and think about the three high leverage practices we've talked about in a very short period of time. This has been a very condensed version of those three: assistive technology, intensive instruction, and positive feedback. Develop an action, or come up with an action that you would like to try based on what you have learned today for one of those three.
Or hopefully you're thinking like, oh, I do some of these things, or my school is really good at database meetings, or I give actionable feedback really well, or something like that. Either way, I think that it's reaffirming that the HLPs that you're doing, that you just didn't know the name of them, and maybe something that you learned today, or something that you want to try. Sorry, I just added that.
Yeah, continue to do. Action to try might be continue. I want to continue doing this. Might jot that chat too, if you want to drop it in the chat and share with others what you're thinking.
I love that, Michelle. She said she wants to try the, I agree with you. How you implement guidance for our data meetings regarding interventions, just like the whole process of it and how it's. I agree. I did better as I went, but I think sometimes people complain about things instead of talking about like an actual systematic way to do things. So depending on what your PLCs look like or your data meetings look like, I think that's a great, I agree with them on my own. The boxes are back, I see.
Michelle, do you have a format, an agenda you follow in your PLC meetings?
Yes, in our PLC meetings, we do have agendas that we follow, but we're just specifically with our math team, we're trying to reel in more conversation and data analysis of our interventions for the best grouping of students. So we're just in the process of trying to make that run smoother and better and more efficient. So I like the information that's been shared today with that.
Do you have just another quick question? Do you have in your teams, do you have roles then? Thank you, Sheila, by the way. Thank you for being here.
In regards to our PLCs or just our team, Matt? Our PLCs, yeah, we do have, we have a PLC leader. But then I'm the 5th grade resource teacher. So I have to split between the 2 subject areas. So sometimes I'm with math, sometimes I'm with ELA. But we have a PLC leader for each of our content areas. And then it's a conversation amongst the team. We all share in typing in the notes for
Good.
PLC. So we have a Google Doc that our administration has us record our documentation on. And then there's guiding questions, of course, that they want us to answer to help guide our discussions. So our PLCs are pretty good. We've just recently implemented our weekly math team evaluation of data and grouping and kind of assessing the programs that we're using, that type of thing. So that's the one we want to try to make a little bit more efficient.
Well, hats off to you for that desire to lend your expertise in that meeting to provide guidance on interventions. Hats off to you for that desire. Any others? I'm sure I speak for all of us, we really appreciate you being here, not only tonight, but I see consistent names here. I see names, I've seen William before, I've seen Michelle, I think all of you I've seen before. Thank you so much for being part of this series. And we certainly want to get feedback from you. And Nikki and Alana, you might want to unmute and add your comments as well. But in all sincerity, thank you not only for being with us, but for what you do each and every day, your commitment to your students and your parents.
Yeah, thank you. Please email us if you need anything extra, anything else, resources. We had fun doing it, so we appreciate you guys. I know it's a long time, but we appreciate you guys engaged. Hopefully you learned something in each of them, at least one thing new, or reaffirm something that you're already doing. So I appreciate you guys.
Yep, and please feel free to use our Padlet with all of the resources. It's got all 4 of the PowerPoint presentations we've gone through in the series, as well as I will add the videos of the series in case you want to rewatch in your free time or share it with other people in your building. And of course, please do our evaluation that's here on the screen on the left side if you are willing to do so. We appreciate you.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Guys. Good night.